Every empire promises that its money is safe. Every government swears that your savings will be protected forever. But history whispers a different story, one written in silver, paper, and digital code. A story not of wealth, but of trust, and how it is always broken, rebuilt, and broken again. Long before our digital age, Rome stood as the heart of civilization. Its silver denarius was the lifeblood of trade, trusted from the deserts of Africa to the forests of Germania. It wasn't merely metal, it was confidence, stamped with the face of an emperor. For centuries, it worked, until greed began to eat from within. Wars grew costly. Emperors discovered they could stretch their power by reducing the silver content in coins. One by one, they debased the denarius. A little copper here, a little lead there, until silver was nearly gone. People didn't notice at first. Markets still bustled, temples still stood, soldiers were still paid, but the price of bread crept upward. Merchants demanded more coins for the same goods, and the quiet corrosion of trust began. Invisible, unstoppable. When Rome finally fell, its citizens still held coins, but they were worthless. Money had lost its meaning. The empire that once ruled the world collapsed not only from barbarian invasions, but from the decay of its currency. Yet from the ashes, Byzantium rose, a city of gold and faith. Its golden solidus became the standard of the medieval world. For 1,000 years, this coin carried the empire's honor. Even distant kings accepted it without question. But time erodes even the brightest metal. Byzantine rulers too began to reduce the gold content, believing no one would notice. They forgot that trust is not measured in weight but in integrity. And so, when the deception surfaced, faith crumbled, just as it had in Rome. History's rhythm continued. Between 1347 and 1351, the Black Death swept through Europe. Half the population perished, cities emptied, fields went wild, and gold lost its power to command labor. But from despair came renewal. With fewer workers, wages rose. The survivors discovered something extraordinary. Their labor, not their coins, was the true source of value. Human skill, creativity, and resilience became the new currency. From death came a rebirth, an echo we would hear again centuries later. In the 1340s, Florence was the beating heart of Europe's banking world. The great houses of Bardi and Peruzzi financed kings and kingdoms. But when England's King Edward III defaulted on his debts, the mighty Florentine banks collapsed overnight. Fortunes vanished, and with them, generations of trust. The pattern never changes. When power borrows too much, when rulers print too freely, when money becomes illusion, collapse always follows. During the 1790s, revolutionary France tried to reinvent wealth. The assignat was born. Paper money backed by confiscated church land. It seemed ingenious. For a moment, faith in the Republic replaced faith in gold. But as war raged and printing presses ran, the paper multiplied. Within years, it was worthless. Bread riots filled the streets of Paris. The people demanded silver again, not promises. Fast forward to the 19th century. The Industrial Revolution reshaped the world. Railways, telegraphs, and steam engines expanded empires beyond imagination. But with innovation came speculation. Banks printed more notes than gold could support. Crises rippled from London to New York, and the pattern returned. In 1921, Germany was a defeated empire, humiliated by war. To pay reparations, the Weimar Republic printed money endlessly. At first, it seemed harmless. Factories reopened, jobs returned. But soon, prices doubled, then tripled, then soared beyond measure. People carried banknotes in wheelbarrows just to buy bread. Children played with worthless bills as toys. And those who once held savings lost everything. Out of that chaos rose something darker. A leader promising stability, pride, and order. When money dies, history shows us, freedom often dies with it. Half a century later, across the ocean, the United States faced its own reckoning. For decades, the dollar was tied to gold under the Bretton Woods system. But in 1971, President Richard Nixon ended that link. Gold was no longer the measure of value. Trust in government became the foundation instead. From that day, the dollar was paper. Powerful, yes, but faith-based. And so began the modern era of fiat money. Every note you hold says, "In God we trust." But in truth, it means, "In government we must." The problem is, governments change, and trust decays. By the 1980s, nations like Argentina and Brazil learned this the hard way. Hyperinflation destroyed life savings in weeks. Prices doubled overnight. A lifetime of work could not buy a single meal. In the early 2000s, Zimbabwe followed the same path. The government printed trillion-dollar bills to pay its debts. People carried sacks of notes to buy a loaf of bread. And then the paper itself became worth more as scrap than as currency. The Asian financial crisis of 1997 struck a generation that believed globalization had made them safe. Thailand's baht collapsed. Investors fled. From Indonesia to Korea, economies crumbled. And once again, the smallest and poorest paid the greatest price. Recently, Lebanon joined this long, tragic line. Banks closed, and citizens woke to find their savings had lost 90% of their value. The money they trusted, the institutions they believed in, gone, like smoke in the wind. If history has one cruel lesson, it is this: money stored in banks is not a treasure, it is a loan, and every loan carries risk. But collapse is not the end, it is the beginning of clarity. When systems fail, people remember what truly matters. They rediscover the ancient truth, that value is not created by decree, but by work, creativity, and resilience. Real wealth is food that feeds, land that shelters, skills that endure, and gold that cannot be printed. Still, humanity never stops searching for a perfect system. Today, that dream has a new name: digital money. Bitcoin, blockchain, decentralized finance. All promise liberation from governments and banks. They claim to restore trust through mathematics and transparency. For the first time, money is not minted by kings or presidents, but by code. And yet, the question remains: can code resist corruption? Can humans create a system immune to human weakness? Every new currency begins with idealism and ends with compromise. Rome had silver, Byzantium had gold, Weimar had paper. We have algorithms. Each reflects its time, and each must face its test. Perhaps artificial intelligence will shape the next economy. Machines that think, trade, and invest faster than humans ever could. But what happens when trust is placed not in people, but in programs? When the creators of money no longer understand how it works? We stand on the edge of another transformation. The line between value and illusion is blurring again. We build digital empires, yet fear digital collapse. We chase convenience, yet forget consequence. But history whispers one more truth. Every collapse carries a seed, a chance for renewal. Rome's ruin birthed Byzantium. Byzantium's fall gave rise to Renaissance Europe. The death of gold-backed money gave birth to a global system of credit. And perhaps the decay of fiat will give rise to something purer, not just digital, but moral. Because money, at its core, is not metal or paper or code. It is trust, and trust begins in the heart, not in the mint. When we choose honesty over greed, discipline over illusion, and creation over speculation, we rebuild the foundation of value itself. So, when the next storm comes, and it will, don't hide behind paper, banks, or screens. Seek real value. Invest in what endures. Gold will glitter, but skills will save. Property will matter, but purpose will lead. And knowledge will always be the currency that cannot be stolen. Every empire falls when it forgets this truth. and every rebirth begins when it remembers. The fall of money is not the end of the world, it is the rebirth of meaning. And as the cycle turns once more, the question returns to you. Will you trust the promises of others, or will you build value that cannot be taken? History doesn't repeat exactly, but its rhythm never changes. The fall is inevitable. The rebirth is eternal. So, what is the real lesson? That every fall is also a beginning. That trust, though fragile, is endlessly renewable. And that money, whether gold, paper, or code, is nothing without the human spirit that gives it meaning. When everything collapses, something beautiful always begins to grow. The ruins of empires hide the roots of rebirth. And though money dies, value never truly disappears. It simply transforms. In the ashes of Rome's collapse, farmers reclaimed abandoned lands. Merchants formed guilds to protect one another. Trust was rebuilt not by emperors, but by communities. Where governments failed, people created their own systems of exchange, small, local, but real. In medieval Europe, the memory of chaos birthed a new kind of trust, the merchant's promise. Paper letters of credit replaced gold coins on long trade routes. A simple signature from a trusted banker in Venice could buy silk in China or spices in India. This was the dawn of invisible money, built not on metal, but on reputation. The Medici family of Florence mastered this art. Their wealth wasn't stored in gold vaults, but in relationships. They proved that true value lies not in what you hoard, but in what others believe you can deliver. Trust became currency, and civilization advanced. When the Black Death ended, a new Europe emerged. Leaner, wiser, hungrier. Laborers demanded fair pay, merchants demanded fair trade, and thinkers began to question old orders. The Renaissance was not just a rebirth of art, it was a rebirth of value itself. Creativity became wealth, skill became capital. And for the first time, human imagination entered the balance sheet of civilization. Centuries passed, and once again, trust evolved. In Amsterdam and London, stock exchanges appeared. Ships sailed with goods financed not by kings, but by investors. Ordinary people risking savings for distant dreams. The Dutch East India Company became the world's first multinational corporation. Money was no longer tied to soil or silver. It was tied to imagination, to paper promises that funded global exploration. Every age of rebirth begins with courage. People dare to trust again, not because they forget the past, but because they must survive. And every time, money changes form to follow that trust. In the 19th century, the Industrial Revolution transformed everything. Coal, steam, and steel replaced muscle and wood. Cities grew like wildfires. The banker replaced the feudal lord, and the factory owner replaced the knight. Money was no longer a symbol of divine right. It was a reward for innovation. But power always seeks control. Governments built central banks to manage the new flood of wealth. And once again, the cycle of trust and deception began to spin. Every regulation was meant to create stability, yet stability itself became an illusion. Then came Bretton Woods, 1944. In the shadow of World War II, world leaders gathered to rebuild global finance. They tied all major currencies to the US dollar and the dollar to gold. For a moment, humanity believed it had finally mastered the cycle. Money, once chaotic, now had order. But order built on promises is fragile. In 1971, when Nixon ended the gold standard, the illusion cracked. Money became untethered, a pure abstraction, a story told by politicians and economists. The dollar was still trusted, but now it floated in belief alone. And yet, this freedom also unleashed new power. Innovation exploded. Computers, satellites, and the internet created entirely new forms of wealth. Information replaced gold. knowledge replaced territory. For the first time, a person with a laptop could create more value than a factory filled with workers. The world had entered the digital age of money. But with new wealth came new dangers. When value becomes invisible, corruption becomes easier. In 2008, the global financial system trembled again. Banks had created money out of promises, mortgage-backed illusions. When those illusions shattered, millions lost homes, jobs, and futures. It was a modern echo of every collapse before it, only faster, louder, and more connected. Yet once again, rebirth followed ruin. From the wreckage of trust emerged a strange new experiment: Bitcoin. No emperors, no banks, no central authority. Just math, code, and consensus. It was humanity's latest attempt to rebuild trust without rulers, to create money that could not lie. Some called it a revolution. Others called it a fantasy. But whatever the verdict, it revealed a truth older than history. Every time we lose faith in institutions, we return to one another, to voluntary trust. Today, the world stands at another turning point. Artificial intelligence writes, trades, and decides faster than any human mind. Machines now shape value, predicting markets, generating content, and even redefining labor itself. We face a question that no civilization has ever answered. When intelligence becomes artificial, what remains truly valuable? Perhaps the answer is not in the machines, but in ourselves. Gold, paper, digital code, all of them are mirrors of human belief. The real currency has always been trust, and the real crisis has always been forgetting that. As we step deeper into the 21st century, nations print trillions, debt soars beyond comprehension, and digital currencies rise like new empires. But history whispers, be careful. Every generation believes it has outsmarted the past until it repeats it. Yet hope endures, because value, unlike money, is eternal. It can be buried, but never destroyed. It lives in creativity, in resilience, in courage, in every person who refuses to let crisis define them. Think of those who survived Rome's fall, who built cathedrals on ruins. Think of the peasants who turned abandoned land into farms, the merchants who rebuilt trade from ashes, the inventors who gave light to the industrial age. Humanity's greatest wealth is not stored in banks, it is born in minds. The rebirth of money is not just an economic process, it is a spiritual one. Every collapse strips away illusion, revealing what truly matters: food, shelter, skill, connection, and above all, the courage to begin again. Maybe one day, future generations will look back on our era, the age of digital wealth and invisible coins, and they will see not greed, but transformation. They will see that even as trust fell, we dared to rebuild it, not through kings or banks, but through knowledge, cooperation, and truth. So what is the real lesson? That every fall is also a beginning. That trust, though fragile, is endlessly renewable. And that money, whether gold, paper, or code, is nothing without the human spirit that gives it meaning. History never sleeps. It watches, records, and waits. And somewhere in that eternal cycle, you and I stand, the next storytellers of value, the next architects of trust. The question is not whether money will fall again. It will. The real question is, when it does, what will we choose to rebuild? Not through kings or banks, but through knowledge, cooperation, and truth. So, what is the real lesson? That every fall is also a beginning. That trust, though fragile, is endlessly renewable. And that money, whether gold, paper, or code, is nothing without the human spirit that gives it meaning. History never sleeps. It watches, records, and waits. And somewhere in that eternal cycle, you and I stand, the next storytellers of value, the next architects of trust. The question is not whether money will fall again. It will. The real question is, when it does, what will we choose to rebuild?